Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our game day edition of the Michigan Man. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. In just a few minutes, we'll be joined by the new Michigan beat writer at MLive, Aaron McMann, for a recap of Saturday's home opener and some early week thoughts on our next opponent, the United States Air Force Academy. On Thursday's Visitors Edition, we'll hear from the radio play-by-play voice of the Falcons, Jim Arthur. Today, let's get things rolling with my view from Section 17. It was a beautiful weather day on Saturday in the Big House. I think we can all agree on that. And we opened the home season with a good win against Luke Fickell and his Bearcats. It was at times a hard game to watch. The offense just could not find a rhythm, and for the most part, it was a sloppy game. Again, it was a W. I didn't know what to expect from this team in the Florida game a week ago, and I think the same was true for Saturday's game. As fans, we would like to see the offense just roll over teams like Cincinnati and impose our will. I mean, after watching the Florida game, even I thought that's what would happen. Instead, I left the Big House on Saturday realizing again we are a young team and this is a work in progress. At his Monday presser, Jim Harbaugh said, "We need to be patient." This was the first week of classes for his players, and playing at home Saturday in front of 111,000 fans can make you a wee bit nervous. It is a lot for these young guys to adjust to. So I'm with Jim on this. We have to be patient, especially with Wilton. I heard a lot of grumbling on Saturday that maybe Wilton should sit down and John O'Korn should get his chance. But if you saw Jim's presser Monday, you heard him say Wilton is the starting quarterback. Jim in no way wanted to enter into a discussion concerning Wilton and his struggles. On defense, there was again a lot to like. We gave up a few big plays, but I mean, come on, they only had 200 yards offense on the day. Pretty solid. So as we enter week 3, there is much to work on. We need to keep in mind that is okay. If you're going to make mistakes, do it in September. By November, I think we are going to see a very different Michigan team. For now, I'm enjoying the ride. It might be bumpy every now and again, but hey, we are 2-0. My guest today feels the same as I do. He did not know what to expect from this team early in the season, but says there is a lot to like and at the same time be concerned about. New Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive joins me next here on our Michigan Game Day segment, here on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. With us here on our Michigan Game Day segment this week as we take a look back at the win over Cincinnati on Saturday and then look ahead to a visit from the United States Air Force Academy this coming weekend is Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. For the first time, Aaron, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Mike. Thanks for the invite.
All of my listeners follow MLive, so they've been getting used to you for the last couple of weeks or months, so it's been a busy start for you, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's been a busy last couple of years. I was covering the Detroit Pistons for a couple of years, and then we've had some departures, as I'm sure most of your listeners know. So I kind of got thrown into it, but it's been good. It's been challenging, but it's a topic I know everybody cares about.
So let's start right off with talking about Saturday's game. Aaron, it was a win, 36-14 against Cincinnati, but there were special team mistakes, missed handoffs, punt return miscues, some shank punts, 2 of those. Maybe what you get in a home opener with a young team, but in general, just a lot of sloppy play, Aaron.
Yeah, and that's kind of what Jim Harbaugh, kind of talked about after the game. He's pleased with the victory and everything else. He thought they did some good things, but at the same time, yeah, he kind of hit on everything that kind of went wrong for him. It's sloppiness across the board from penalties to miscommunication on punt returns to sloppy handoffs from Wilton Spate. A little bit of everything across the board. Harbaugh speculated, after the game that maybe some of it had to do with obviously it being the first home game of the regular season. But, at the same time, this Michigan team is playing a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys who are kind of seeing their, game time for the first, real time. And classes had started this week, so guys are getting kind of used to the schedule. They'd gone through a month of preseason camp, obviously, where it was pretty much football every day, all day. Now you got to adjust to not only school and practice, but, being able to perform on the field on game day.
Well, you mentioned Wilton Spate. We saw he did have a couple of those handoff issues. His stats line, though, pretty darn good. But ball safety, happy feet with no pressure in the pocket a lot of times we saw. And then, of course, we all saw missing wide-open receivers, so the accuracy was an issue against Saturday. Jim still stuck with him. He said he was going to before the game. But your overall thoughts on Wilton's play?
Yeah, he threw the ball a little bit better. I think everybody was looking at, obviously those 2 first-half interceptions against Florida. I think he cleaned that up a little bit. Obviously he was pretty mistake-free when it came to throwing the ball. Overthrew a couple of guys. I can remember one instance in the second half. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones was wide open there on the flat. It was, I think, second and short. He just completely overthrew him. From that perspective, I think he was fine. But some of his handoffs, some of his possessions were a little sloppy, and Spate kind of, he didn't touch on it much after the game. Jim Harbaugh was asked about it. He thought it was all on Spate. One instance, he took a handoff in the Cincinnati zone, and I think he was trying to hand it off to Ty Isaac, and it just, I don't know if it slipped out of his hands or it was a miscommunication, or we never really got an answer on that. And then in the second instance, which ended up being a turnover, he goes to hand the ball off to Koa Crawford on the jet sweep to the right side, and it just fell out of his hands, fell out of Koa Crawford's hands, and it ended up being in a turnover, obviously. Not good, not something you want to see from your junior quarterback who played, who was expected to take a big jump this year. He struggled, obviously against Florida a little bit, and then now you got questions of whether or not he's able to hold on to the ball with on a consistent basis here. So it was one thing against Florida, it's another thing against Cincinnati here. You hope next week against Air Force he's able to clean all of that up.
It's only 2 games, and clearly there are things to work on, but he's got a pretty darn good coach in Jim Harbaugh to help him get that cleaned up, so we'll see this week what happens with Wilton. But this week, Aaron, another solid performance from Ty Isaac, 133 yards on 20 carries. He really looked good, didn't he?
He did, and I was surprised at the number of carries he got. I expected him to, see an increase. Obviously, I think he had 22 last week. Chris Evans at 22. He had 11. I expected that number to be a little bit closer this week. And looking back at the carries afterwards, Isaac, and he got a bulk of them. They went to him early. I think he had the first 4 plays from scrimmage or handoffs to him. And then on the second drive, he got the first 2 carries as well. It was clearly that it was evident there they were trying to attack the Cincinnati defensive line, who struggled the week prior against Austin Peay. Gave up 224 yards rushing. he looked good. He's a guy who's obviously been on the program here for a couple of years. Kind of worked his way up the depth chart. I think some expected him to, have a good year. But I would say if he continues on this path, he's looking at a 1,000 1,500 yard rushing season. His speed is good. He's kind of worked on his body a little bit in preseason camp in the summer. He kind of realized, in talking to him before the season started, he kind of realizes, this is his last shot. He's a senior, last year of eligibility. He said he wants to continue playing football, as I'm sure most of those guys do as seniors. But he's got to show it in the field, and so far he's looked really good.
Probably moving ahead going to be running back by committee, or three guys getting carries in that backfield. But I would have to say he's earned that number one spot for right now as far as the guy who's going to get the most carries next week.
Yeah, I would say so too. Chris Evans, he had a decent game against Florida. I think he rushed for 78 yards, if I remember correctly. He's still got some time to learn. Evans is still, I think, trying to bulk up a little bit. He said publicly that he's still trying to become that guy that can carry the ball at every down. So he's got some time. I wouldn't fret if I was a Michigan fan worrying about Evans maybe falling behind or falling down the depth chart. I mean, he's still going to get his carries, he's still going to get his opportunities. And I think it bodes well for Michigan, as the season goes on. I think they're going to have their depth at running back. I think it's going to be paramount here, especially with them still trying to get, some of these younger receivers on board, with Spate struggling. It kind of gives them a fallback option there offensively to move the ball down the field.
Well, the defense pretty much picked up where they left off last week against Florida. Had good efforts from Tyree Cannell, Kaliki Hudson, another 4 sacks. Your take on the defensive play overall, Aaron?
Yeah, the secondary, I thought, played really. They bounced back. They weren't necessarily awful against Florida, but there were some miscues and some misplays there, and they got beat. I can remember Lavert Hill getting beat a couple times on long passes down the field. They really bounced back and they played well. You saw two interceptions, one from Tyree Cannell, a return for a touchdown there early on. Kind of helped Michigan get to that early 14-0 lead. And you saw another pick six late in the game. So I think it bodes well for their confidence. I think as a group, this is a unit that I think coming into the season, I think had the most question marks. A lot of youth, a lot of inexperience back there. But so far, I mean, they look good against Cincinnati, and I think, it was asked actually after the Florida game whether or not they thought they were tested, and the group kind of, they didn't think so. They thought they didn't get as many opportunities as maybe they were hoping for against the Florida team that they thought was going to try and throw the ball a little bit more than they did. But against Cincinnati that likes to spread the ball out, likes to get the ball downfield, they kind of got that opportunity to show themselves. And obviously Cincinnati isn't that Big Ten offense or that high-powered offense that maybe they're going to see later on the season. They got some work in. They looked pretty good. I just wrapped up my post-game grades. I think I gave them as a group a B+ or an A-, which is one of the highest out of the units. But they played well.
A lot to like in what we saw from the defense. I don't think a lot of worries there. Last week, though, I thought Donovan Peoples-Jones did a nice job in punt returns. That's one of the things against Florida I really liked. I liked that he didn't fair catch too often. He wants to bring it back. But Jim said during the week he needs to take better care of the ball. And not doing that yesterday, or on Saturday, I should say, prompted a change in punt returners because he did have issues Saturday, several. So Grant Perry came in. It was a rough day for young Peoples-Jones, wasn't it, Aaron?
It was, early on, I think it was the first punt, he kind of misread it, I think, and let it fall down and didn't call for the fair catch. And it was a big miscommunication issue. Michigan ended up obviously getting the ball, but it was a blunder. And then it was, I think, the second punt of the game where, again, he didn't call for the fair catch, let it kind of drop in front of him, and then went off the back of Benjamin St. Just there, and it ended up in a turnover. Those are the type of issues, miscues. A team like Michigan, I don't think can afford, especially later on in the season when they're playing better teams like Penn State or Wisconsin or whatever the case may be. And Harbaugh was asked about it after the game, and he basically boiled it down to inexperience. Peoples-Jones is obviously a true freshman. He's still learning things. He's still learning when to catch, when not to catch. If it was up to him, as you mentioned earlier, and he said publicly, he wants take every ball and run with it. He wants to score. He wants to help his team, and that's great. That's something you want your young guys to be they'll be like that, but at the same time, they also have to be smart and take care of the football. You saw some instances yesterday, I think, of People Jones being a freshman. I think you got to learn. Harbaugh said afterwards that they've got some more teaching to do with him. I suspect you'll see him back at some point, obviously, this season. I think returning punts. I don't think he's necessarily been booted off the job just yet, but it was certainly a learning experience.
Well, Jim pointed out after the game, this team has guys playing at this level for the first time, a lot of them. And as Jim said, the only way to learn is to play. That is one thing we all have to keep in mind, I think, Aaron. It's 2 weeks into the season. It is a work in progress, and there are going to be more bumps in the road, aren't there?
It is, and you've seen some bumps, I think, elsewhere, not just at punt returner. I didn't think, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think the secondary played, especially well against Florida. You've seen some mistakes on the offensive line. You got some young guys playing, in different positions, for the first time. They're playing in games for the first time. You're going to see mistakes, and I think for Harbaugh and his staff and Michigan in general, I think, you want those mistakes cleaned up. But at the same time, I think they want them making them, early in the season when you can necessarily kind of afford those things right now. You're playing some of these lesser opponents, like in Cincinnati. You've got Air Force coming up on Saturday. This is the time to get those things out and cleaned up. And it is what it is. Harbaugh, he went into length after the game actually when he was talking about an experience, and he was asked actually, whether or not he's kind of mellowed out a little bit, having coached the NFL and in college and everything else. He basically acknowledged he has a little bit more patience nowadays. He realizes some of these kids are younger, they're playing for the first time, and he's got to wait it out, so to speak. Let them learn, let them grow, and then you hope that they take your coaching, your guidance, and turn it into better play.
Well, a lot of us are watching that offensive line play intently this year to see improvement. We know we need that. They were inconsistent in the run game. I mean, still, we ran pretty well. They did, I thought, a good job in pass protection. Wilton had, for the most part, time to sit back in the pocket and look around. So, when it comes to the offensive line, I suppose we can nitpick it to death. But overall, I think they're playing pretty well, Aaron.
Yeah, they have been. And especially you've got, you've got some guys playing out of position. Mason Cole moved from center to left tackle. You've got Patrick Kugler starting for the first time at center. He's particularly done a good job. And you've got some young guys on the right side. Nolan Ulizio at right tackle, Michael Onwenu at right guard. They're at this point, I think those are the two kind of weak links at the same time. But they're learning together. It hasn't been too bad just yet. This is a group I think you're going to see the most growth out of at the same time this season. They're a group where they spent a lot of time, and when they talked about this in preseason camp, they spent a lot of time together outside of practice, just kind of, hanging out with each other, learning about each other. And I think that goes a long way to developing that trust and bond that I think you need when you've got a group that is inexperienced as this one is.
Well, over on the defensive side then, Aaron, John Brown has his guys playing, again, fast, flying around 2 weeks in a row. We've seen that. Is this defense so far about what you expected or better, or do you see some issues developing there?
Yeah, I would say it's about what I expected. And I think coming into the season, everybody, the defensive line was, so highly touted. Rashawn Gary, Maurice Hurst, Chase Winovich playing as a senior. You've got some talented, experienced guys up front there. The linebacking core I've been particularly impressed with, Devin Bush especially. He led the team in tackles last week. I think he was second on the team this week in tackles. Had a sack, and he had a tackle for a loss. The linebacking core is playing especially well. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the secondary I think played better than I expected this week in Cincinnati. They struggled against Florida. I think that was the weak link kind of coming as part of this defense, whether or not they could hold their own, so to speak. And obviously the jury's still out. But no, I think they're playing fast. They're playing kind of how Don Brown envisioned them and wants them to play. I'm curious to see how they play against a better offense. Florida, I expected more of them, but they didn't show a whole lot. Cincinnati, is what it is. And Air Force we know what Air Force is going to do. They're going to run the ball nonstop. But I'm curious to see how this defense reacts to a Penn State in Week 7, a Wisconsin on the road. And I think that's when we'll learn how good this defense really is.
Well, after 2 weeks, we're 2-0. We've seen, I think, some very good things from the defense. On offense, the running game is better than I think most of us thought it would be. Quinn Nordin, we've seen as a weapon in the kicking game. Those are positives. There are issues which we've talked about, such as Wilton's accuracy, special teams, ball security. But the good news about all of those things we've seen as issues is they're all fixable, Aaron.
They are. It's like I mentioned earlier. It comes with time. It comes with experience. And Jim Harbaugh again talked about this after the game. He mentioned that the only way to get better is to actually playing games and be put in positions where you can learn and get better. And they're doing that right now. Like you mentioned, Quinn Nordin's been a bit of a surprise. He's kicked particularly well. He's 4 for 6 against Florida, 2 for 2 again against Cincinnati. Will Hart's shown some areas. He's shown some flashes. He had, I think, a 61-yard punt against Cincinnati the other day. So there's flashes there. There's areas where I think you can see that this Michigan team can be very good. It's just a matter of, I think, waiting it out, so to speak, and letting them develop.
With us here in our Michigan Game Day segment this week as we recap the Cincinnati win over the weekend and now look ahead to the visit from the United States Air Force Academy over the weekend is Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Aaron, as I said, next up, the Air Force Academy at home Saturday. They had a bye this week after beating VMI 62-0 last weekend. Ran up almost 500 yards in the ground. In this era of spread offenses and wide open football, what we're going to see this Saturday is the polar opposite, the triple option. This is an amazing offense to watch unless you're a defensive coordinator trying to stop it.
Yeah, I think they're one of the few teams in college football that, still run. I think them, Navy, and maybe one other team. But it is, it's one-dimensional, but at the same time, they've got so many different nooks and crannies to that thing. I think I counted in the box score in their game against VMI, 16 different ball carriers. You're going to see guys get the ball in wacky situations, all over the field. They do different things to try to mask what they're trying to do. It's going to be a test, I think, for Michigan's defensive line. I'm curious to see how they respond, especially in the linebackers at the same time. You're going to see guys who will. They'll try and spread the field. They'll try and bunch things up. They'll do some, like you mentioned, they'll do some wacky things. I think Michigan's defense, is prepared to handle it. They've got the size and they've got the speed. I think they showed that against Florida. They're able to throw in sideline to sideline. So whatever Air Force tries to pull out, I think Michigan will be able to handle it.
Well, we know Don Brown has had the defense preparing for this offense since the spring. You just don't see it, rarely. I guess unless you're playing Air Force, you're not going to see the triple option. Now, a lot of people might laugh that Don was preparing even in the winter and into the summer with this defense, but, I'm right there with Don on this. When you have an aggressive attacking defense, which we have, that's sort of exactly what the triple option can feast on, because anyone from CYO to high school to college that's played against an option offense knows your mindset almost has to change, because now you have to stay in your lane. You have to stay at home. You have to be disciplined. You have to keep your assignment. It's assignment football. You have to tackle well in open space. So stopping this offense, it's no joke.
No, you're absolutely right. It takes a level of preparedness. You have to be, I think, focused in on, like you mentioned, your assignment and what your job and duty is for that driver, that player, whatever the case may be. It'll be a test. It'll be to watch. I think if you're a Michigan fan that doesn't get to watch many other teams outside of the conference. It's a different brand of football. It's fun. And like I mentioned, it'll be something that I think shows how this defensive line can handle a nonstop run heavy offense.
The tandem, though, to watch on this offense for them is senior running back Tim McVeigh and junior quarterback Arian Worthman. If you whiff on either of these guys, they can chunk up the yards on you and get to the end zone fast. If anyone fans got to see any of that game or have seen it on tape, they are really fun to watch. This offense really moves fast.
It is, and that's one of the things about the triple option. They need to move quick. They need to be efficient. I can recall when I covered Central Michigan, my college days, they played Navy, and it was a similar situation where Navy ran the triple option. You had to be prepared for it. You needed to prepare well in advance for it. And if you have the right guys running it, you can be successful. It's a thing where they run through that offense constantly nonstop. It's bred in them, so to speak. It's something that you have to be prepared for and ready to defend against.
Well, Aaron, one of the amazing stats with the Air Force offense is that last year, starting quarterback Arian Worthman never threw more than 10 times in any game. He was 8 for 12 against VMI last Saturday. So, it's pretty simple. You stop the run, Michigan wins.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he does with the secondary. Obviously they've got some young guys out there. I'm curious to see if he goes bigger or maybe more experienced with the guys on the outside. Just like you mentioned, they won't throw the ball a ton. So they're going to need those guys on to help. And I'm curious to see what he goes with the personnel.
Well, on the defensive side, Air Force is really going to be undersized. They have their first ever 300-pound player, one of the defensive linemen, and they don't have the team speed that most of Michigan's competition does. Once again, this will be another good opportunity for Michigan's offense to get better and fix a lot of things, Aaron.
Yeah, I think I counted one returning starter on the defense from last year. So they'll be, like you mentioned, undersized. I think lacking a ton of experience, and I think that'll bode well again for Michigan's rushing game. I expect them to go early and often to Ty Isaac. I'm sure they'll get Chris Evans involved there some more. And it'll be a good opportunity too for Wilton Spate to kind of iron out some of his issues. Again, I thought maybe he'd do that against Cincinnati, and he did to some degree. But I think he needs to put together a complete game, error-free, turnover-free game with the Big Ten schedule, coming up. But no, it'll be good. It'll be good kind of, I guess, tune-up for Michigan's offense. I'm curious to see where they're at. They've done a good job of involving some of the younger receivers. Nakoa Crawford, obviously, Tariq Black. I'm sure they'll do the same thing against Air Force. And I would expect Michigan to jump on them early and then run away with it.
Well, a final thought, Aaron, and then we'll let you go. We focus as Michigan fans on how young Michigan is this year, but Air Force is right there with us. They are one of the least experienced teams in all of college football. So with the nerves, the big stage, and them running an offense, it really requires execution and timing. Turnovers and mistakes will probably be what does them in on Saturday, or else gives Michigan a real headache.
Yeah, and I think you saw that early on against Cincinnati. This is a team that never been in the big house. Obviously, their coach Luke Fickell had been, so he was doing his best to prepare his guys. But you saw early in the first quarter, Cincinnati struggled with the noise and the sights and the atmosphere and everything else. They had to take a couple of timeouts there. I think they had a delay game penalty, if I recall correctly, early on. But that type of atmosphere, 111,000 or whatever the case may be at Michigan Stadium, it rattles opponents, especially those younger guys who have never been in that atmosphere before. Air Force is coming from a stadium that holds 35,000, 40,000 people, so this is a different world for them, and it certainly helps, and it will give Michigan an advantage.
My guest today on our Game Day segment, as we've been recapping the Cincinnati win and then looking ahead to this week's visit from the United States Air Force Academy, has been beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Aaron, great to have you with us on the show and have you on the Michigan beat this season, so we look forward to having you back soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap up our Michigan Game Day show here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, here is an overview of what Jim Harbaugh had to say at his presser on Monday. He is very respectful of the Air Force Academy and this team will be playing on Saturday. While talking about his own defense, he said good players and good schemes. Jim said Lavert Hill has asserted himself and Maurice Hurst played the best of the guys up front. He reiterated that Wilton is the starter. When asked about Brandon Peters, Jim said he's progressing nicely. Jim said Patrick Kugler is doing a fine job driving the car and making the calls on the offensive line. He said freshman Donovan Jeter recently had surgery and is out for the season. Kareem Walker and Oliver Martin are both working on injuries. Jim was irritated by some of the questions about his injured players and why Michigan doesn't offer a dress list for games. He said if the media wants to use binoculars and figure out who is dressed or not, that's their business. He said it's not fair to broadcast what injuries are for college players. Michigan's Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week was on Monday night's Inside Michigan radio show and said he wants everyone, including his head coach, to start pronouncing his name right. Tyree Kinnell, not Kinnell. He said he's used to it, but it would be nice if people said his name right. A reminder that our free show app is available from the Google Play and iTunes stores. You can also hear us on Stitcher, iHeart, TuneIn, and Wolverine Sports Radio. If you get the show from iTunes, please take 1 minute to rate or comment on the program. Thanks again to our guest today, Aaron McMann from MLive. It's Aaron's first year on the Michigan beat, and we look forward to having him back on the show later in the season. On Thursday's Game Day edition, we'll get the inside scoop on Air Force from their radio play-by-play voice, Jim Arthur. So please make sure you come back for that. That will do it for another edition of Michigan Game Day here on the Michigan Man. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'll see you again later this week with Air Force radio voice Jim Arthur on the Visitor segment. Until then, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!